Okay, for this video we're going to talk about signal path. So hopefully you've read chapter 8 in your text and you understand the concepts of capture, store, and monitor. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the signal from this microphone and we're going to follow its pathway from here into the control room and back out to this headphone mixer, which is sitting right here. So that might seem pretty straightforward, right? The mic and the headphone mixer are sitting right next to each other. How complicated could that be? Well, in a home recording studio, it's not going to be very complicated. You're going to plug your microphone into your audio interface. That's going to have a preamp on it most likely. Then that's going to convert the analog signal into a digital signal. It'll go into your recording software, and then you'll be able to monitor that back through your audio interface into headphones or speakers. Pretty straightforward. Well, it's a little bit more complicated when you get into a bigger recording studio, and I like to have a lot of options. So let's follow this signal path. So it initiates here at the microphone. This is a transducer, converts our acoustic energy into electrical energy. Travels through this wire, which is neatly coiled, and runs down into this box right here. This is a special power supply for that mic. Whenever you start getting into higher quality condenser microphones, it's not uncommon for them to have their own power supply. So that has a special multi-pin connector, and that feeds the power and accepts the signal from the microphone. Coming out of there is a mic cable that runs along behind the organ, along the wall, and plugs into this panel over here on the wall. Now I've got multiple panels like this in the studio, and each one of these can take up to 12 inputs. 8 of them are on XLRs and the other 4 are on tip ring sleeve. Those used to be my headphone inputs, but now I am using them as additional inputs. And my headphones are now being fed by these panels here. There's 2 of those in the studio with 4 connectors each. So I can run up to 8 headphone mixers, so the people out here in the studio can control their own mix in their headphones. Takes a lot of work off of my hands. And those are distributed from the control room, and those are sent out here using Cat5. So there's 2 big multi-channel audio snakes, they're called. One of them carries the analog signals from the mic inputs, and the other one is a Cat5 bundle which sends digital signals back, and those go out to my headphone mixers. Those snakes go up behind the wall, up into the ceiling, across the ceiling, and then they drop down kind of over here in the corner, and they come out. Hope this isn't too Blair Witch for you. Nobody's going to get sick, I hope, watching this. They come out of a hole in the wall, and then they go into a big punch down plate, which you can see all of the wiring harness for it sits underneath here. This great big bundle of wires. Okay, those wires are all of the connectors in my studio. You can see there's a lot of them. They come up here, and it shows up here on the patch bay. The patch bay allows me to have all of the inputs and all of the outputs for every single piece of equipment in my studio right at my fingertips. Sitting above the patch bay are my audio interfaces, and all of that is connected together and goes into the mixing board, and I've got my software, which is doing the recording, the storing part of it. So we're capturing it with the microphone, and then we're storing it on the computer, and then we can either monitor it through these monitors or the headphones that are out in the booth. So I'm plugged into mic input number 1. So there are 24 of those across the top row of my patch bay. I'm plugged into the first one. So that cable is going into the input over here. I have inputs into most of my mic preamps already kind of plugged in and ready to go. So I'm going from there to the input of this mic preamp right here, which is a nice tube mic preamp. It sounds really good. It's got some built-in compression. It's got a de-esser. It's got some EQ. But primarily I'm using it just as a mic preamp. So the signal's coming in there. We can see it. Hey! Hey! See the needle jump? Okay, cool. Now that's going to come out of the patch bay on this wire here, and then I can plug it into any input on my recording system. Now I've got 3 of these things. Each one has 8 inputs and 8 outputs that are analog. You can see a little bit of signal showing up right there when I talk. So I've got 24 inputs and 24 outputs analog, and then I also have that mirrored on digital inputs and outputs as well. So I've got a total of 48 ins and 48 outs. So I just plug that mic into input 15. So on my software here where it says lead vocal, it's routed in on input 15 and it goes out, output 15, and you can see the signal bouncing on that little meter there. So once it comes out of output number 15 on the patch bay, it's automatically normaled, it's called, or wired straight into channel 15 on my mixing board. So when I talk, you can see that meter moving. I've got a little reverb coming back there. So that's how I can now get that channel individually on a channel fader on my mixing board. Now, how do I get that out to my headphones? Okay, I'm using what are called auxiliary sends. And so I have different auxiliary sends set up over here to feed my headphone distribution. So for instance, all of the drums, which are over here, if I push this button, I can see those are where my drums are going. So that's my drum mix going out to the headphones. There's my bass. There's my guitars. There's my keyboards on number 5. And on number 6 is my vocal. So out of the back of this mixer, there are 8 outputs, which are called auxiliary sends. And those auxiliary sends are all feeding into, whoops, pardon my fingers, this distribution hub. So you can see when I talk, there's signal going out of output number 6. So that is what's going back out through the snake, up through the wall, through the ceiling, back out into the booth, through that Cat5 cable, and into that headphone mixer right there. So you can see that this is a pretty complicated setup. So let's review. How does it work? Microphone into microphone power supply on the floor. From there, behind the organ, into the wall panel, into input number 1. From there it goes into a snake that goes up through the wall, across the ceiling, and drops down into the corner of the room, into a punch down panel that's located in a box underneath this mixer. That punch down box is connected into this patch bay, which allows me to route signals anywhere I want them to go. So I'm taking output number 1, plugging it into my Manley mic preamp, out of that mic preamp into input number 15 on my analog to digital converter. From that output, which is being bounced out through the software, so the signal is going into my software, back out number 15 into my mixing board on channel 15. Always makes sense to keep the numbers the same. Out an auxiliary send, number 6, into a headphone distribution system, which allows me to send that back out to the booth so the singer can just turn up knob number 6 on their headphone mixer if they want more of themselves. That way they can set up their own mixes. It's great. It's easy. I don't have to mess with it in the control room. So that's an example of signal path in a professional studio.